Clara Thompson was the envy of everyone. Her beauty and wealth seemed boundless, but her mother, Victoria Thompson, always thought Clara was too spoiled. At the height of her desperation to teach her a lesson, Victoria made a drastic decision. She required Clara to spend the summer before her 21st birthday, helping in the city's poorest neighborhoods. The climax of her plan? Clara would have to interact daily with George, a man known for his unkempt appearance and miserable life. In the affluent neighborhood of Ridgewood, where the grandeur of towering mansions cast long shadows of power and privilege, Victoria Thompson stood by her expansive living room window, her gaze fixed on the sprawling gardens that mirrored the opulence inside. The room, adorned with intricate antique furnishings and lavish draperies that whispered of wealth, was silent except for the soft ticking of a grandfather clock, an heirloom that stood as a sentinel of time passing. Victoria's eyes, however, were not just admiring the meticulously maintained roses or the fountain's graceful arcs of water. They were focused on her daughter, Clara, who was gracefully moving among the guests of their garden party. With every laugh and effortless charm, Clara, draped in a designer dress that hugged her figure perfectly, personified the very essence of young, carefree luxury. Her hair, a cascade of golden curls, shimmered in the sunlight, drawing admiring glances from many. Yet beneath her poised exterior, Victoria's mind was tumultuous. She admired her daughter's beauty and the ease with which she navigated their elite social circle, but she harbored deep concerns. Clara, soon to turn 21, seemed to glide through life with an air of detachment from the realities that plagued those less fortunate. Her world was one of galas, spontaneous trips to exotic destinations, and conversations that rarely dipped below the surface of their privileged existence. As the laughter from the garden floated through the open window, Victoria turned away, her expression clouded with decision. The walls around her, lined with portraits of ancestors who had built their legacy on resilience and cunning, seemed to press inwards, reminding her of the values she hoped to see in Clara. Moving to her study, a room filled with leather-bound books and the faint scent of mahogany, Victoria sat at her antique desk. Papers lay neatly stacked, a testament to her meticulous nature, but today they were merely a backdrop for her contemplations. She pulled out a sheet of stationery, the top embossed with the Thompson family crest, and began to write a letter, each word carefully considered. "Clara," she began, her handwriting a flowing script, "it is time for you to embrace a summer of learning, away from the comfort of Ridgewood's embrace." She outlined a plan, far removed from anything Clara had experienced before. Instead of summering in Europe or attending high-profile events, Clara would spend her days in the poorer districts of the city, working alongside those who struggled daily to make ends meet. It was here, Victoria hoped, Clara would learn the humility and resilience that her current environment had failed to teach her. The climax of this plan involved George, a man whose life was a stark contrast to Clara's. Known for his unkempt appearance and his residence in a dilapidated house on the outskirts of town, George was a figure often whispered about in Ridgewood. Yet, Victoria knew his intelligence and his keen understanding of life's harsher realities could offer Clara lessons no university or gala could. As Victoria sealed the letter, she felt a mixture of apprehension and hope. This summer would either bridge the gap between Clara and the realities of the world, or widen it irreparably. With a deep breath, she called for her assistant to deliver the letter to Clara, who was still among the guests outside. The sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the lawn as Clara, oblivious to the shift that was about to occur in her life, laughed brightly. The final rays of sunlight danced across the garden, signaling the end of the day and the beginning of a summer that would redefine Clara Thompson. The stage was set, and as the chapter closed, the next began with Clara's encounter with George, setting the tone for a journey filled with unexpected revelations and challenges. As the sun began its descent, casting a warm golden hue over Ridgewood, Clara drove beyond the familiar tree-lined avenues of her neighborhood. The luxury that marked her daily life gave way to a landscape she seldom visited. A part of the city where wear and tear were evident in the sagging roofs and peeling paint of the houses. Here, Beauty was not in the architecture, but perhaps, as her mother suggested, in the resilience and spirit of those who lived among these remnants of neglect. Clara parked her sleek car along the curb. The stark contrast between her polished black vehicle and the dusty road was striking. She stepped out, her heels clicking sharply against the gravel, a sound oddly loud in the quiet of the late afternoon. Her eyes fixed on one house in particular, one that seemed to lean warily to one side as if bearing the weight of untold stories. Standing in front of George's home, Clara took a moment to absorb the sight. The house was more a shack than a home, with its dilapidated wooden panels and windows patched with whatever materials were once available. It was a stark embodiment of deprivation, so far removed from her cushioned existence that it felt like stepping into another world. With a deep breath, she approached the door, her hand hesitating for just a moment before knocking. The sound seemed to echo, a hollow reminder of the divide between her world and his. The door creaked open slowly, and there stood George. His appearance was as Victoria had described, hair tangled and unkempt, clothes worn and patched, a stark contrast to Clara's well-groomed figure. His eyes, sharp and assessing, met hers with an intensity that took her aback. "Clara Thompson, I presume?" His voice was rough but clear, carrying a tone of neither welcome nor disdain. Clara nodded, her usual confidence slightly shaken by the man's piercing gaze. "Yes, I'm here to help. Yes, I know," George cut her off, stepping aside to allow her entry without further ceremony. Clara stepped into the house, her senses assaulted by the mustiness of the air, the scent of old wood, and a faint hint of tobacco. The interior was sparse, functional, with furniture that bore the marks of many years of use and repair. Every corner spoke of a life lived with necessity as its architect. Clara followed George through to the kitchen, a small room lit by the fading light. He pointed to a stack of wood needing chopping and various other chores that awaited. There was no offer of tea or pleasantries, just an unspoken expectation for her to begin. Her hands, manicured and soft, felt oddly out of place as she picked up the axe to chop wood. Each swing was clumsy at first, her muscles unaccustomed to the labor, but as the pile of chopped wood grew, so did her understanding of her mother's intentions. As the sun set completely, leaving only the twilight to illuminate her efforts, Clara's initial resistance gave way to a grudging respect for George's daily reality. Here, in the simplicity and hardship of his life, were lessons she had never learned in her 20 years of luxury. George watched her from a distance, his expression unreadable. He had seen many come and go, claiming a desire to understand or to help, but few stayed long enough to truly see anything beyond their initial discomfort. As dusk turned to evening, Clara stood, wiping the sweat from her brow, looking at the stack of wood with a sense of accomplishment. She turned to George, who had been silently observing her. "Tomorrow, then?" she asked, her voice carrying a new edge of resolve. George simply nodded. "Tomorrow." With that, Clara left the dimly lit kitchen, stepping back into the evening air, the last light of day fading behind the horizon. As she drove away, the silhouette of George's figure in the doorway lingered in her mind, a symbol of the many stories and lessons yet to unfold. The chapter closed with her journey back into her world, her thoughts already turning to what the next day would bring, marking the beginning of a transformative summer. As the days unfolded into a pattern of early mornings and late evenings, Clara found herself increasingly immersed in the world George inhabited. The initial awkwardness of handling manual chores gave way to a rhythm, her hands becoming more adept at tasks she had never before considered. But beyond the physical labor, it was the mental and emotional education she was undergoing that began to reshape her perceptions. George, a man who initially presented himself with a gruff exterior and scant patience for pleasantries, gradually opened up as they spent hours together. His conversations were sparse, but each word carried weight, filled with wisdom and an unembellished truth about the realities of life outside the sheltered confines of Ridgewood's elite. Unlike the superficial exchanges Clara was accustomed to, George spoke of life's complexities with an authenticity that was both unsettling and captivating. Each morning, Clara would arrive to find George already at work, his figure bent over a garden or fixing something around the house. His hands, always moving, seemed to weave stories into the very air between them. He talked about his days in university, a time that seemed to belong to another life, one where he was not marked by his current destitution, but by his intellectual promise. His eyes would sometimes distant as he recounted theories and philosophies discussed in old, ivy-covered lecture halls, halls that Clara knew her father had once walked through as well. "What made you leave it all behind?" Clara asked one afternoon, the curiosity finally spilling over as they rested under the shade of an old oak, the summer sun too harsh above them. George looked at her, his gaze intense. "Life isn't about what you start with, Clara. It's about what you do with what's thrown at you. I made choices, some good, some bad, but all mine." His stories pieced together a puzzle of a man who had once walked a path similar to her father's, but had diverged drastically somewhere along the way. George spoke of a crisis, a moment when the expectations of the world he was part of clashed violently with his personal beliefs, leading him to abandon a promising career and the accolades that would have followed. The details were sparse, shrouded in a sort of reticence that suggested deeper wounds and unresolved conflicts. As the days passed, Clara noticed the small crowd that occasionally gathered around George's house. Neighbors, often hesitant, would come with things that needed fixing, and George would help without expecting anything in return. Through these interactions, Clara saw the respect they held for him, a respect not derived from wealth or status, but from his unwavering integrity and kindness. One particularly sweltering day, when the air felt thick and the sun relentless, Clara learned perhaps one of the most poignant lessons. A young woman from the neighborhood, her face worn beyond her years, approached with a broken heater. As George fixed it, Clara listened to their exchange, the woman's voice low, filled with a quiet desperation about the approaching winter. "Why do you help them?" Clara asked later, as they watched the woman walk away, a small relief in her stride. "Because I can," George said simply, wiping his brow. "Because sometimes, knowing there's someone who can help is all the hope people need to keep going." This lesson in humility and the intrinsic value of helping others struck a chord with Clara. She began to understand the profound impact of genuine, selfless actions, a stark contrast to the performative charity she had seen among her social circles, where every contribution was a transaction, every gesture a photo opportunity. As the sun began to set on another day, marking the transition from the sweat and dirt of daily labor to the quiet contemplation of the evening, Clara felt a growing determination. She was beginning to piece together not just George's past, but the lessons he embodied, lessons that were slowly reshaping her own future. As the days melted into weeks under the summer's relentless heat, Clara's curiosity about George's past grew into an unshakable obsession. The stories George shared hinted at a life once filled with potential and promise, a stark contrast to the humble existence he now led. Driven by a need to understand the transformation of a man who seemed destined for greatness, Clara embarked on a journey into George's past, seeking clues in the dusty corners of history that might illuminate the reasons behind his dramatic shift in path. Her investigation began in the quiet, solemn aisles of the local university library, where rows of aged yearbooks lay in wait. Under the dim, flickering light of an old desk lamp, Clara thumbed through the pages of decades-old annuals, the musty smell of paper filling her senses. Each page turned was a step back in time, and as she delved deeper, the faces of young, hopeful students gazed back at her, frozen in their moment of youthful optimism. When she finally found the year George had attended, her fingers paused, tracing the lines of text that described a young man markedly different from the one she knew. George had been a standout student, his academic excellence noted in numerous club photos and honors lists. His eyes, bright and ambitious in the black and white photographs, seemed to hold the spark of future successes. The contrast between the young, vibrant student in the yearbook and the weathered man she worked alongside was jarring. Fueled by these revelations, Clara sought out those who had known George during his university days. Her search led her to a series of interviews with retired professors and alumni who remembered him not just as a peer or pupil, but as a brilliant mind whose potential seemed limitless. Each conversation added layers to her understanding of George's character. They spoke of his keen intellect and his passionate debates, of the bright career they had all anticipated he would have. Why then, Clara pondered, did someone with such promise choose to vanish into obscurity? The question nagged at her, each answer provided by George's old acquaintances bringing her closer yet no clearer to the truth. One particularly enlightening discussion came from an old professor, his office walls lined with books and memories of past students. He recalled George as a fierce advocate for ethical practices in business, often challenging the status quo and debating ethical dilemmas with a fervor that was both inspiring and, at times, polarizing. He was never one to just accept things as they were, the professor mused, his eyes clouding over with the recollection. He believed in doing what was right, not what was easy. I often wondered if that idealism cost him somehow. These conversations painted a picture of a man deeply committed to his principles, perhaps too much so for the cutthroat world he was about to enter. Clara left each meeting with a heavier heart, sensing the complexities of George's decisions weaving a dense tapestry of moral convictions and sacrifices. With each new piece of the puzzle, the image of George that Clara had, of the simple handyman with a mysterious past, began to shift. He was emerging as a man of deep integrity and profound courage, someone who had perhaps chosen isolation as a refuge from a world he could no longer reconcile himself with. As Clara drove away from the last interview, the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across her path. Her mind was abuzz with thoughts, theories, and a deepening respect for the man she thought she knew. She was now poised to confront George directly, hoping to bridge the gap between his past and present. The day of Clara's 21st birthday dawned clear and bright, a perfect canvas for the celebration she had planned in the sprawling gardens of her family estate. As the sun climbed higher, casting dappled shadows through the leaves of ancient oaks, the garden transformed under the meticulous hands of decorators. Strings of delicate fairy lights twinkled among the foliage. Tables draped in ivory linen stood adorned with vases of fresh flowers, and a small stage for the evening's musicians was set against the backdrop of the estate's impressive facade. Clara, dressed in a flowing gown that caught the light with every movement, greeted each guest with a smile that masked her inner turmoil. The recent discoveries about George's past had stirred a mixture of emotions within her, and his presence at the party, though outwardly unremarkable, charged the air with a palpable tension. As the afternoon slipped into evening, the garden buzzed with the laughter and chatter of the assembled guests, a mixture of Ridgewood's elite and Clara's personal friends from various phases of her life. Waitstaff in crisp uniforms navigated the crowd with trays of champagne and delicate canapés, ensuring the glasses remained full and the conversation flowed freely. George, however, seemed an island unto himself. Dressed more neatly than usual, but still markedly less refined than the other guests, he moved awkwardly through the clusters of chatting people, his interactions brief and somewhat stilted. Despite his discomfort, there was a quiet dignity about him, an undeniably intriguing presence that drew sidelong glances and curious whispers. As night fell and the garden lights cast a surreal glow over the scene, a heated discussion began to unfold near the makeshift bar. A well-known businessman, a friend of Clara's father and known for his abrasive manner, had engaged George in conversation. The discussion, innocuous at first, veered unexpectedly into the territory of past grievances and family legacies. Clara, catching snippets of the conversation as she circulated among her guests, felt a sudden chill despite the warm evening. Her approach went unnoticed as the businessman's voice grew louder, his gestures more animated. "How can you possibly understand the complexities of family businesses, George? You, a man who has lived on the fringes, away from the burdens of legacy and responsibility." George's response, though spoken quietly, carried a weight that silenced the surrounding conversations. Perhaps because I have seen what the weight of such legacies can do to a family, how it can tear them apart and bury the truth under layers of pretense and pride. The silence that followed was palpable, and all eyes turned as George continued, the words seeming to draw from a deep and long-hidden well of truth. "And perhaps because I am not as removed from these legacies as you might think." The businessman scoffed, turning to the onlookers with a dismissive wave. "What would you know of the Thompsons' burdens? It was then that George's gaze met Clara's, a silent communication passing between them before he turned back to face the crowd. More than you could possibly imagine, for I, too, am a Thompson, the brother of John Thompson, separated not by distance but by disputes and a scandal that we thought best forgotten. The revelation struck the gathering like a thunderclap, silencing the murmurs and drawing gasps from the crowd. Clara's father, who had been conversing with old friends by the oak tree, turned sharply, his expression one of shock and dawning comprehension. As the weight of George's declaration sank in, the party's atmosphere shifted palpably, the festive lights now casting long shadows over the faces of friends and family alike. The implications of this revelation, a family long lost and now returned, began to ripple through the crowd, setting the stage for confrontations and reconciliations that would unfold under the night sky. As George's words echoed through the evening air, the festive ambiance of Clara's 21st birthday celebration was abruptly transformed into a tableau of stunned silence and disbelief. The revelation that George was, in fact, a long-lost Thompson struck at the heart of the family's history, unearthing secrets that many in attendance had presumed were buried deep within the annals of time. Victoria, standing slightly apart from the crowd, felt the ground shift beneath her feet. The plan she had so carefully orchestrated to instill a sense of humility in her daughter had spiraled into a scenario she had never anticipated. She watched, her heart a tumult of emotions, as the guests processed the news, their expressions ranging from disbelief to awe. The gravity of her unintended consequences weighed heavily on her, the evening's lights casting long shadows that seemed to mirror the sudden darkness of her thoughts. Meanwhile, Clara, her initial shock giving way to a rising tide of emotion, moved towards George, who stood still amidst the chaos of whispers and murmuring. Her steps were hesitant at first, but determination shone in her eyes as she closed the distance between them. The guests parted, forming an impromptu aisle that led her to the man who was her uncle, a word and a relationship she had never thought to utter or embrace. Her father, John Thompson, was slower to react. The years of estrangement and the pain of past disputes had left deep scars that George's words had torn open afresh. Yet as he watched his daughter embrace her newfound uncle, something within him stirred, a longing for reconciliation and the healing of wounds too long left festering. Pushing through his hesitation, John joined Clara and George, his approach tentative but purposeful. The reunion was a poignant scene that unfolded under the soft glow of the garden lights. Clara and John, tears mingling with smiles, reached out to George, their gestures bridging the gulf of years and misunderstandings. The embrace that followed was one of profound significance, not just for the individuals involved, but for all witnessing the event. It was an embrace that spoke of forgiveness, of forgotten disputes, and of the hope for a future where family bonds would once again be cherished. Victoria watched, her own eyes moist with tears, as her family found a way back to each other. The irony of her initial intent, to teach humility through hardship, culminating in this moment of familial healing, was not lost on her. She realized that sometimes the lessons most powerfully learned were those that came about through unforeseen paths. As the initial shock subsided, the guests began to murmur among themselves, the story of George's identity and his long separation from the Thompson family weaving its way through the crowd, igniting conversations laden with speculation and wonder. The atmosphere gradually shifted from one of shock to one of celebration, as the significance of the reunion infused the party with a new, deeper joy. The evening continued, the music resuming its melody, softer now and more reflective. The stars above seemed to shine a little brighter, their light a silent witness to the healing and unity that had unfolded below. The Thompsons, now a family reunited, found themselves surrounded by friends and well-wishers, their earlier festivities transformed into a celebration of not just a birthday, but of a return, a reconciliation, and a hopeful beginning. As the seasons shifted from the warm hues of summer to the crisp edges of autumn, the Thompson estate, too, underwent a transformation, mirroring the changes within its inhabitants. In the months following the revelatory birthday party, George's gradual reintegration into the family tapestry brought about subtle shifts in their dynamics and perspectives, particularly in Clara. With George now a regular presence at the dinner table, evenings at the Thompson estate were filled with stories of his years away, tales of hardship and resilience that were both sobering and inspiring. These narratives, rich with the wisdom of hard-earned experience, painted a picture of life starkly different from the sheltered upbringing Clara had known. It was through these stories that Clara began to see the world through a lens ground in the grit and grace of reality, rather than the polished veneer of affluence. Motivated by George's journey and the newly discovered depths of her family's history, Clara found herself questioning the role she played within her community. The passive charity events she once attended, gala dinners and silent auctions, no longer held the same appeal. They seemed now like distant echoes of a life less aware, less engaged. Driven by a newfound resolve, Clara embarked on a project that sought to address the direct needs of Ridgewood's less fortunate. She spent days meeting with local leaders and volunteers, her presence a testament to her commitment. Her project, named Bridges, aimed to provide not just temporary relief but sustainable support to those in need. She envisioned a program that included job training sessions, educational workshops, and health services, all designed to empower the community to build a better future for themselves. Her dedication soon breathed life into Bridges. Empty lots in neglected parts of town were transformed into vibrant centers of learning and growth. Gardens bloomed where waste once lay, classrooms rose in places marred by decay, and health clinics operated in spaces that had seen too much neglect. Clara was at the heart of this transformation, her hands as dirty as any volunteers, her spirit as fiery as the most passionate activists. Watching Clara, George felt a profound sense of pride and a quiet reassurance that his decision to reconnect with his family had indeed been the right one. The Thompson legacy, once characterized by its business acumen and societal influence, was broadening to include a commitment to genuine, impactful community service. Victoria and John, initially unsure about the extent of Clara's involvement, were soon won over by the tangible results of her efforts and the positive media coverage that followed. It was becoming clear that Clara was not just participating in charity, but was leading a movement that was reshaping the community. As winter approached and the first frost kissed the ground, Clara stood in the midst of a newly inaugurated community center, her breath visible in the cold air. She looked around at the faces filled with hope and determination, feeling an overwhelming sense of purpose. This project had started as a way to understand and honor George's legacy, but it had grown into her personal mission, a defining aspect of her identity. The transformation of Clara Thompson was now complete, not just in her actions, but in her very being. As she prepared to address the gathering, her voice clear and her resolve unwavering, she was a testament to the profound impact of one's heritage and the transformative power of facing and embracing the truth. As the winter deepened, casting long shadows over the rejuvenated landscapes of Ridgewood, Clara's foundation, Bridges, thrived, becoming a beacon of hope and transformation. Yet, amidst the flurry of activities and the community's accolades, Clara observed a subtle shift in George that tugged at her attention. George, who had been an integral part of the foundation's inception and success, began to exhibit a quietude that was out of character for the man who had so passionately shared his life lessons and experiences. His usual eagerness to engage with the projects and people around him waned, replaced by periods of reflective silence, particularly during discussions that delved into personal histories or the Foundation's future directions. His smiles were tinged with a melancholy that seemed rooted in distant, unspoken thoughts. Concerned, Clara made a point to spend more time with George, often accompanying him on walks through the very neighborhoods they had helped transform. During these strolls, she attempted to broach topics of his past, hoping to understand the source of his introspection. However, George skillfully steered their conversations away from himself, focusing instead on the progress of their work or the changing seasons. Clara's concern grew into determination to uncover the root of George's melancholy. Her opportunity came unexpectedly one chilly afternoon when she and George were sorting through old boxes in the estate's attic, an area that had become a makeshift storage for not only the family's heirlooms, but also items left over from estate sales and donations to bridges. Amidst the dusty trunks and forgotten artifacts, Clara stumbled upon a leather-bound diary, its cover worn and its lock rusted open. The pages, yellowed with age, contained dense, meticulous handwriting that she recognized immediately as George's. The entries dated back decades, chronicling thoughts and events that predated even his mysterious departure from his academic and business pursuits. With the diary in her hands, Clara felt the weight of George's unspoken past. She read entries filled with aspirations, conflicts, and philosophical musings that provided a window into the intellectual and emotional landscape of a much younger George. But as the entries progressed, the tone shifted. The later pages revealed a man grappling with disillusionment and ethical dilemmas, his writing punctuated with questions about integrity, the corrupting influence of wealth, and the cost of maintaining one's moral compass in the face of adversity. The diary also hinted at a significant event, veiled in vague terms and half-finished sentences, which seemed to have precipitated George's withdrawal from his previous life. However, the details were cryptic, the full story obscured by George's cautious pen. Sitting in the dim light of the attic, surrounded by relics of the past, Clara realized that the diary was not just a record of George's history, but a map to understanding the man he had become. It was clear that the answers she sought about George's change in demeanor were held in these pages, answers that he had perhaps been unable or unwilling to voice. Armed with this new insight, Clara knew that a conversation with George was inevitable. She needed to bridge the gap that his reticence had created, not just for his peace, but for the integrity of the bond they had formed through their shared work and newly discovered family ties. As she descended the attic stairs, diary in hand, the winter sun dipped below the horizon, casting the last long shadows of the day across the snow-blanketed estate. Clara felt a mix of apprehension and resolve. She was about to peel back the layers of George's guarded past, hoping to bring to light the secrets that had silently shaped the man she had come to respect and care for deeply. The evening they chose to delve into the diary's secrets was marked by a relentless downpour, the rain drumming a steady rhythm on the windows of the Thompson Estate's library, where Clara and George had decided to meet. The room, usually a place of quiet solitude, felt charged with an anticipatory energy as they sat opposite each other across the heavy oak table, the diary lying between them like a silent arbiter of truth. Clara, her nerves taut with the weight of what they might uncover, watched as George's fingers lingered over the diary's cover before he carefully opened it. The pages, filled with his younger self's neat, precise handwriting, seemed to whisper echoes of past confessions and secrets long buried. As they turned each page, Clara was drawn deeper into the complexities of George's once promising future, now a labyrinth of decisions and moral quandaries. George, his voice steady despite the tremor of emotion that occasionally broke through, narrated the entries, providing context where the written word fell short. He spoke of a time when his career was on the rise, his life path seemingly clear and unobstructed. But as the entries progressed, the tone shifted from one of optimism to disillusionment. George recounted how he had stumbled upon a web of corruption that entangled many influential figures in Ridgewood, including, to Clara's dismay, her own father. The revelations detailed in the diary spoke of under-the-table deals, manipulated contracts, and silenced dissent, schemes designed to consolidate power and wealth, often at the expense of the less fortunate. George explained how, as he dug deeper, the weight of the truth became a burden too heavy to bear alone. Yet exposing it threatened to unravel not just his career, but the reputations and lives of those he had once respected and admired. It wasn't just about protecting myself or even our family's name. George's voice broke through the rhythmic pattering of the rain. It was about preserving the semblance of integrity in a system that had none. I couldn't be part of it, Clara. I chose to walk away, to live a life removed from the power and the corruption, hoping it would shield you all from the fallout. Clara listened, her heart heavy with the weight of her family's entangled legacy. The man she knew as her uncle, now revealed as a guardian of their family's honor in his own way, had sacrificed more than she had ever imagined. The diary, a testament to his journey, laid bare the high cost of his choices. As the storm outside began to wane, leaving in its wake a silence that felt both oppressive and cleansing, Clara and George sat with the enormity of the truths uncovered. The room, with its walls lined with books filled with stories of other lives and other secrets, seemed to close in around them, a reminder of how deeply their own lives were inscribed in the complex narratives of Ridgewood's elite. The evening drew to a close with a heavy sense of resolution and resignation. They knew the journey ahead would be fraught with challenges as they navigated the implications of these revelations, not just for themselves but for the wider community. As they prepared to leave the library, the last of the rain trailing down the window panes like tears for past sins, Clara felt a renewed sense of purpose forge within her. She realized that the path forward would require not only confronting the shadows of their family's past, but also ensuring such shadows would not darken future generations. The chapter closed with Clara steadying herself against the weight of her legacy, determined to steer it towards a future where integrity and truth defined the Thompson name. In the quiet aftermath of the storm that had swept through Ridgewood, Clara found herself grappling with the revelations unearthed from George's diary. The knowledge weighed heavily on her, casting long shadows across her thoughts as she made her way to confront her father, John Thompson. The walk through the corridors of their family home, a path she had tread countless times in innocent oblivion, now felt like a solemn march towards an uncertain confrontation. John was in his study, a room lined with shelves of legal tomes and artifacts of his successful career in business. The air was thick with the scent of aged leather and wood polish, a testament to the years of accumulated wealth and respectability. He sat behind his mahogany desk, his posture rigid, as if bracing for the storm he sensed was about to break within the sanctity of his personal retreat. Clara stood at the threshold, her silhouette framed by the dim hallway light, the diary clutched tightly in her hands. Her voice, when she finally spoke, carried a tremor that betrayed her turmoil. "Father, we need to talk about what's in here," she said, her words hanging between them like a challenge. John's eyes, normally steady and commanding, flickered with a hint of vulnerability as he motioned for her to sit. Instead, Clara chose to remain standing. The diary opened to a page marked by a folded corner. She read aloud an entry, her voice growing steadier as she recounted the details of a dubious deal that implicated her father in unethical practices. As she spoke, the air in the room grew charged with tension. John's face, usually the mask of composed leadership, crumbled under the weight of his daughter's words. The lines of his face deepened. Sorrow etched into his features as the truth he had hoped would remain buried was laid bare by the daughter he cherished. The silence that followed her reading was suffocating. Clara, her heart hammering against her chest, waited for her father to respond. When he finally spoke, his voice was a mere whisper, strained with emotion. "Clara, he began, struggling to compose himself. "Yes, it's true. Everything George wrote about, I was involved. It was a different time. Choices were made, choices I regret deeply." The confession shattered the last vestiges of the facade John had maintained for years. He stood, coming around the desk to stand before Clara, his demeanor that of a man seeking absolution from the person whose opinion he valued above all others. "I've spent years trying to right those wrongs in ways you never knew about. Not to erase them. They can never be erased, but to atone somehow." Clara listened, the conflict raging within her. The father she knew and admired, now revealed as flawed and morally compromised, was still the man who had raised her with love and protection. She wrestled with her emotions, torn between the impulse to turn away in disillusionment and the deeper, more challenging desire to understand and perhaps forgive. The tension in the room slowly ebbed as they both grappled with the revelations. Clara, moved by her father's remorse but disturbed by the deceit, knew that the path to reconciliation would be fraught with difficulty. Yet, she also recognized the courage it took for him to admit his failings in the face of her evident pain. In the days following her confrontation with her father, Clara wrestled with the magnitude of the decisions before her. The study where she had uncovered the unsettling truths about her father now became her sanctuary, a place where she and George pored over old documents, correspondence, and additional journals that George had kept hidden, piecing together a more comprehensive picture of the corruption that had once threatened to undermine the ethical foundations of their family's legacy. The room, usually so calm and orderly, was now strewn with papers and old photographs. Notes with timelines and names covered the walls, a visual representation of the intricate web of deceit they were untangling. Each piece of evidence they uncovered added weight to the dossier they were building, a meticulous record of past misdeeds, annotated with George's first-hand experiences and corroborated by the evidence Clara had painstakingly gathered. George, ever the pragmatist, provided not just his memories but also guidance on how to navigate the dangerous waters they found themselves in. "It's not just about revealing the truth," he would often remind her, "but about how we manage the aftermath. We need to consider the fallout, not just for us, but for everyone involved." Clara found herself torn between two painful choices: expose the full extent of her father's involvement in the corruption, thus risking the ruin of their family's reputation and possibly their social standing, or keep the secrets buried, preserving the facade of integrity but compromising her own moral values. Each option carried its own burden, a labyrinth of potential consequences that seemed to offer no clear exit. As the investigation deepened, Clara's resolve hardened. She spent long nights in the study, her only companions the ticking of the clock and the flickering flame of the desk lamp, as she pored over the documents. The weight of her family's future seemed to loom large in the quiet space, pressing down on her with an almost tangible force. In one particularly revealing document, a letter written by her father years ago, Clara found evidence of his attempts to extricate himself from the corrupt dealings. It detailed his growing unease with the choices he had made and his subtle efforts to amend his ways. This discovery brought a new dimension to Clara's understanding of her father, a man flawed and entangled in his own mistakes but not devoid of conscience. With each revelation, Clara's determination to craft a path forward that honored the truth without completely destroying her family's legacy grew. She envisioned a press conference, a controlled environment where the truth could be revealed on her terms, mitigating the damage while demonstrating a commitment to transparency and ethical responsibility. As she organized the final pieces of the dossier, the early morning light began to filter through the windows, casting long beams across the chaos of papers. The dossier, thick and damning, sat completed on the desk, a testament to her and George's efforts to shine a light on the shadows. The day of the press conference dawned with an uneasy calm, as if the very air of Ridgewood held its breath in anticipation of the revelations that were to unfold. The Thompson estate, usually secluded and serene, was now the focal point of a gathering storm of media personnel, with news vans parked along the perimeter and journalists milling about, eager for a story that could shake the foundations of the local elite. Inside, the Grand Hall had been transformed into a makeshift press room. Rows of chairs faced a podium adorned with microphones and the Thompson family crest in the background, a symbol of the legacy now under scrutiny. Clara, dressed with an understated elegance that belied her inner turmoil, reviewed her notes one final time. Beside her, George stood as a steadfast presence, his earlier reservations set aside in support of Clara's decision to bring the truth to light. As the clock struck the hour, Clara stepped up to the podium, her posture confident, her voice clear and resonant as she greeted the assembled reporters. The room fell into a hushed silence, the soft murmur of whispered speculations fading away as Clara began to speak. "Today I stand before you not just as a member of the Thompson family, but as a citizen committed to truth and ethical responsibility," Clara declared, her gaze sweeping across the room, meeting the eyes of the reporters. She proceeded to unveil the extent of the corruption her father had been involved in, detailing the manipulations and unethical practices that had enriched few while undermining the trust of many. With each disclosure, the air in the room grew heavier, the gravity of her revelations palpable. Camera shutters clicked frantically, capturing the moment when Clara Thompson, heiress to one of Ridgewood's most respected families, held her ground against the very legacy that had raised her. Her father, John Thompson, sat in the front row, his expression one of resignation and newfound resolve. When Clara spoke of his involvement, she did so with a respectful tone, acknowledging his efforts to amend his past misdeeds. "My father has chosen to step back from all his business roles to focus on personal redemption and to support the restructuring of our enterprises on ethical lines," she announced, her voice steady despite the emotional weight of the statement. John, in a move that surprised many, stood and faced the audience, his voice carrying a tremble of genuine remorse. "I fully support my daughter's actions today. It is time for me to face the consequences of my past, to make amends where possible, and to support Clara as she leads our family toward a future defined by integrity and transparency." The conference concluded with Clara outlining the steps the Thompson Enterprises would take to ensure transparency and ethical governance going forward. Her composure and detailed plan won her cautious respect from the community and marked her as a new kind of leader, one molded by the very truths she had fought to uncover. As the reporters dispersed, the buzz of conversation and the clicking of cameras continuing outside, Clara felt a complex mixture of relief and foreboding. She had done what was necessary, had exposed painful truths, and now stood ready to navigate the challenges of forging a new path for the Thompson legacy. As the seasons changed and the initial tumult of the press conference settled into a quieter but profound influence on the community, Clara's foundation, Bridges, stood as a testament to her commitment to change and transparency. The revelations about her family's past had not deterred her. Instead, they had fueled her determination to redefine what the Thompson legacy would represent. Under Clara's leadership, Bridges expanded its reach, now not only addressing immediate community needs, but also setting up scholarships and mentorship programs aimed at empowering the next generation of ethical leaders. The foundation's activities were diverse, from funding local startups that promised sustainable and ethical business practices to creating community gardens in neglected neighborhoods, transforming them into vibrant centers of community interaction and mutual support. George, who had initially stepped into the limelight as a figure of moral courage during the press conference, had become an integral part of Bridges. His role transcended that of a mere advisor. He was a symbol of integrity and resilience. His life story, a powerful narrative used in workshops and seminars to inspire both young and old. His presence at Clara's side was not just a support for her, but a message to all who knew their story, that it was possible to stand firm in one's values, no matter the cost. Clara, for her part, grew into her role not just as a leader of a foundation, but as a visionary who challenged the norms of philanthropy and business. She held regular open forums where issues of ethics, leadership, and community development were debated vigorously. These forums became a breeding ground for ideas and strategies that pushed Ridgewood toward a more inclusive and ethical future. Her efforts to maintain transparency in her endeavors were meticulous. Quarterly reports on Bridges' activities and finances were published without fail, and she invited external audits to ensure that every aspect of the foundation's work was up to the standards she preached. This openness built a level of trust in the community that had been eroded by years of backdoor dealings and unspoken agreements among Ridgewood's elite. In this environment of renewal and reformation, Clara learned that the true measure of a family's legacy was not just in the wealth or status accrued, but in the character and courage it upheld in times of challenge. The lessons she learned from the trials of her family's past shaped her into a leader who not only faced the truth, but wielded it as a tool for betterment. As winter gave way to spring, Clara stood in the garden of the community center she had helped revitalize, looking at the families enjoying the new space. The laughter of children playing amidst the greenery, the conversations of parents and neighbors seated on benches under newly planted trees, all seemed to echo the success of her efforts and the positive impact of her decisions. She realized that her actions had not only reshaped her family's legacy, but had also planted the seeds for a future where integrity and honesty would flourish. As she walked back towards the community center, her steps were firm and her heart was resolute, ready to continue the work she had begun, knowing well the path ahead would require unwavering dedication and continual vigilance.
So, if you're not subscribed yet, click on the subscribe button below and join our community. Thank you for your support and see you in the next videos.